Here ends the reading of God's holy word. It is true, and it can be trusted. Amen. So last week I was on vacation with my two sons, and I want to say thank you for the opportunity to be away for some rest and rejuvenation. We had a plan since January. We were going to go to Michigan. We're going to visit with some family outside of Bay City, Michigan. And then, on our way back from Bay City, we were going to stop on the other part of the state, on the Lake Michigan side. We went to Saugatuck. And we had a wonderful time. The best part is that our family from Missouri and Alabama were also with us last week. We just don't get together enough. It's been 13 years since I've been to Michigan with the boys to visit their aunt and uncle. We were long overdue for a trip. I was born in Michigan, and my faith life began there. And it was interesting how the two places we went to, it's like I had come full circle from the beginning of where my faith started. It was September 21st, 1969. I was baptized. The First Presbyterian Church, Flint, Michigan. I was one of 14 children baptized that Sunday. And First Pres is a rather large church. My parents both went there when they were children, one to the early service, one to the late, so they never had met till college. And it's kind of neat to go back because my aunt and uncle, they're still members at First Presbyterian Church in Flint, Michigan. My Aunt Barbara was there the day I was baptized, as was my father. How nice it was just to be together. Well, then at the end of the week, we drove over to Saugatuck. And Saugatuck is this picturesque little village. It's connected to another community called Douglas. And it borders on Lake Kalamazoo and the Kalamazoo River. And a lot of people go to Saugatuck from Chicago on the weekends. And they pull out their big boats. Pull them out the Kalamazoo River out onto Lake Michigan, and it is an impressive sight. When I was a child, we went to a Presbyterian church camp just outside of Saugatuck. And so from my earliest times of memory, I remember being there. And that was a place where seeds of faith were planted in my life. It was a very wooded area, but then you go down to the beach and there's Lake Michigan. It was beautiful. And our family would be assigned a certain cabin. We got to do crafts and swimming, and we had vespers at Elm Lodge, and we sang Kumbaya and Pass It On. Good Presbyterian songs there in the mid to late 70s with that acoustic guitar. But I grew in my faith. On Friday, it was the 42nd anniversary of Elvis Presley passing away. I was at family camp that day. I was 8 years old. I could read. Someone was reading the paper, Elvis is dead. I climbed up the little tire swing, and I just hung out up there for a while, contemplating what that meant. I have a memory. I was swimming in Lake Michigan, and it was the last day, and I was always kind of sad to leave on the last day because then we're going to go home, and that experience wouldn't be with me anymore. And so I remember swimming, and I was underwater and just saying, I love you. I'm trying to think, did I say that to the water? To the sandy floor with all the rocks and pebbles and shells? Maybe I was saying I love you to camp, or just maybe those seeds of faith were planted. I was saying I love you to God. So for us to go back last week, and we didn't go to the camp, because you just can't recreate those memories. We walked around Saugatuck. We went to Oval Beach. It's awesome, and we're going next year, so. You know, faith is what carries me. Now, during my middle school years, it's kind of a weird thing. Before a test, I would make a little pencil cross on my desk. Like that was going to help me. Especially if I didn't study. Jesus doesn't help those who don't study. But I'm in middle school, and for whatever reason, I'm making a cross on my desk. And I think even then, you know, my faith was starting to take root. I make lots of mistakes, don't get me wrong, but there's been room for that faith to grow. And thank goodness God has lots of servants in the Bible who weren't perfect. Those seeds of faith, they grow, and then you start to produce fruit, and it's a wonderful thing. I can't talk for you, but for me, my faith, it's kind of like that armor of God that we read about in the Bible, the breastplate of righteousness, the helmet of salvation, the sword of the Spirit. My faith, I feel like it protects me, it surrounds me, it strengthens me, helps me to deal with the world. You know, sometimes I have little tremors in my faith where I get a little shaken. Life events happen to me, and it's like, dear God, why? It was not my plan. But you know, God doesn't promise an easy way. God promises that God will be with us along the way. Through times of joy, times of challenge. You know, I don't watch cable news, but I'm in the loop on social media. I do get a newspaper every day, but the news depresses me, let's be honest. Sometimes you wonder why, God, why? And what am I doing here? And what difference can I make? You know, the book of Hebrews was written for early Christians who also had little tremors in their faith. Maybe sometimes they wonder, why, God, is this happening? And you know, Hebrews chapter 11, where our epistle reading comes from today, it's a chapter on faith. And it was written for those early Christians who were kind of questioning. You know, what is faith? The assurance of things that are hoped for. It is the evidence of things not seen. You know, my eyesight tells me that you're right here. And that I am in church right now. My eyesight tells me that. It is a sense that gives me evidence of the world around me. Well, faith is the sense that gives us evidence of the invisible, spiritual world. You know, faith has enabled people in our past to overcome their challenges. And you know, throughout the Bible, there are great examples of godliness, but all were under different circumstances, all involving people with different personalities. But they had one thing in common. They had faith in God. You know, faith gives understanding regarding the invisible world. You know, you don't have to prove it to me that God created the world, because I believe it in my heart. And I believe it because that's Scripture tells us. Genesis chapter 1, verse 3, when God said, "Let there be light." In Psalm chapter 33, verse 6, we are told, by the word of the Lord, the heavens were made. Faith at the beginning of human history. We can go all the way back to Abel. You know Abel. He was born with his brother Cain. And in chapter 4, verses 3 through 5, both Cain and Abel give an offering to God. Cain gives a gift from the ground, something that is grown. Abel gives the finest of his flock. And for whatever reason, God appreciated Abel's gift better. Abel at that early stage was displaying his faith. Think about Noah. We had our children's sermon today about Noah. I mean, if someone asked me to build a big ark and to go round up all these animals, I'm like, I don't know there, God, I don't know. Noah didn't even question. He didn't say, well, why, God, why? He just did it. I'm glad for that. You know, I think about Abraham and the patriarchs. God says, Abraham, leave your home and all of your family and move to the land I will show you, and there I will make you the father of a great nation. Abraham didn't bat an eye, even though he was way old. He and his wife Sarah were past the point of childbearing age. I don't know, God, how that's going to work for us to have so many descendants like the stars. I think about Sarah's faith. She had millions of descendants, and her faith had an impact on their lives, more than she could have ever dreamed. Think about faith in the life of Israel. Moses was born, and all the boy babies are supposed to not live, and Moses' parents hid him for 3 months. A sign of faith. And then Moses grew up, but he did not adopt Pharaoh's God as his God. Speaking of Moses and his faith, boy, was it tested numerous times by the stiff-necked people out in the wilderness. And when the Egyptian army is chasing Moses and Israel straight to the Red Sea, Moses had faith that they were going to get through, and they did. You know, when they ever finally made it where they were supposed to go, there was Jericho that had to be conquered. Well, how are we going to conquer Jericho, God? We don't have an army. Oh, just march around it 7 days straight. Okay. And they defeated Jericho. I think about Rahab, who wasn't even part of the Jewish tradition. Rahab was a harlot. And she received some Israelite spies, knowing that their God was awesome. And Rahab lived because of her faith. And then I think about all the imperfect heroes of the Bible. People like Gideon, who boldly destroyed idols, and God used him to defeat a much larger army of Midianites. But Gideon, he questioned his faith. I think about Samson. Samson was very strong, but he had a weak mind and weak morals. But God was able to use him to defeat the Philistines. And even King David, who wrote a lot of our Bible, he was a remarkable person of faith, but he made mistakes. The confirmants love to hear about Bathsheba. So in spite of themselves, their faith led them to do wonderful things in God's name. So whenever my faith is tested, I think about some of these people and how they were tested. You know, the book of James tells us that real faith will always do something. And that's why I like mission. I like mission trips. I like supporting our school, and I like helping with the Help Excite Little People, because we are helping people in our community and around our world. Real faith, okay, it puts words into action. And so, my biggest example is Jesus, the pioneer, the perfecter of our faith. It seems like in the gospel, Jesus is always praying. Whenever he was tempted, like by the devil in the wilderness, he always had God's word to back him up. And I think about Jesus, who reached out to people on the margin. And he healed people who weren't clean. Think about Jesus, who he prayed to God at the end, God, if there's another way, I don't want to go through this, but he did. So as I think about my faith, and if I think about the faith of the others, well, ultimately it's Jesus. So as we run this race, as we try to put our faith into action, we give thanks for all these people who inspire us and keep us going so that we can finish the race. So may God bless you in your life of faith, in your faith journey. Grace and peace to you. In the name of the Creator, the Christ, and the Holy Spirit.